Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Io Johnson, and I'm just here to introduce you guys to two professionals in the Bermuda public school system to talk about the Bermuda public school system's counseling program. First of all, we've got Menelik Rudo, who's a school counselor, and we also have Mrs. Rashanda Keynes. Mrs. Keynes is the acting education officer for counseling. So welcome, both of you. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to start with Mrs. Keynes. Give us an overview of the counseling program. Tell us a bit about who are the people that you supervise and what is it really all about?
Okay. Well, for the past 2 weeks, I have been in this role as the acting education officer for school counselors. And in this role, I directly supervise 26 school counselors that work in the areas of primary school, middle school, and preschool as well. And then also, I supervise or manage the entire school counseling program. I would like to note that also we have two supervisors that are at our high school or senior schools. At Cedar Bridge Academy, we have Mrs. Clindell Lowe, who directly supervises the counselors at Cedar Bridge Academy. And at the Barclay Institute, we have Miss Cindy Smith. But yes, so in my role, I directly supervise the pre-primary and middle school counselors and just oversee the entire school counseling program within the Bermuda Public Schools.
Great. Can you tell us how do you actually get to become a counselor? Can you tell us what your story was? And then Mr. Rudo can tell his story as well.
Okay.
You get
Well,
profession.
well, okay. All right. Well, I have sort of a long story. I've been working in this profession for 25 years now. I received my education, my bachelor's degree in psychology at the University of Alabama in Huntsville in June of 1994. And I received my master's degree in counseling psychology in December of 1997. And I would like to point out that it is necessary in order for someone to become a school counselor, they do have to have a master's degree in school counseling or a related field. So from there, I actually started working as a school counselor at Bermuda Institute in January of 1998. And then my husband got a job in New York City, and we moved to New York in June in the summer of 1998. And so I started to work at a high school there in New York City. I was the school counselor and the registrar. And I worked there for 3 years until we returned here in Bermuda in September of 2001. In November of 2001, I worked as a substance abuse counselor for 1 year at Fairhaven Treatment Center. And then from there, in November of 2002, I began working at Cedar Bridge Academy as the first school social worker on the island. And from there, I actually worked as a school social worker for 6 years. And then I moved over into a school counseling role the following year. So that was for 14 years. I was a school counselor at Cedar Bridge Academy. And 20 of my years within the counseling profession have been spent at Cedar Bridge Academy. In November of 2022, it was 20 years there. So I've had a variety of experiences, mostly with the education. Actually, the majority of my years have been spent in the education field, supporting our students within our school counseling program.
Mr. Rudo, what's your story? You don't look as if you've been in the business for 20 years. So
Not yet, not yet.
Not
So the story actually started when I was about 14 years old. I
wow.
was with my mother in an office, and we were thinking about what I could do over the summer to work.
Mm,
She said, "You know what? You do pretty well babysitting your little cousins. You might want to try the summer day camp program that we have in Bermuda, the Bermuda summer day camp program." So in I think my fifth year, when I was working at Camp Hibiscus, the supervisors often tasked me with the students who were having kind of some of the social skill issues and problems of problem solving and working with their peers. Um,
mhm,
Children that were giving the counselors a bit of difficulty, the uh, camp counselors. And then I think the supervisor said to me, "Have you ever thought about being a counselor, a school counselor?" I said I hadn't. And then we kind of fast tracked that to say, well, I think that's something that you should look into. I had looked up what it took to become a school counselor. I needed some years in the education system. So I started as a paraeducator at Purvis for 3 years. And then I did my master's in school counseling at Acadia. And I graduated in 2020. Then I did 1 year as a substitute teacher slash substitute school counselor. And I
mhm.
started in 2021, 2022 as my first year as a school counselor at Victor Scott Primary and Pre. And this is my second year there.
Okay. So you're still based at Victor Scott right now.
Correct.
What does it look like for you being a counselor? What does a counselor actually do? In case anybody's wondering out there.
Got you. So the day can be very different, depend day to day, but the major task that I am tasked with is giving individual and group counseling sessions to students. I have what's called individual planning that I do with the P5 students, which helps them and their parents to learn more about careers and where they'd like to be in the future, and also how they feel that they're doing in school.
Mm,
We also do guidance lessons where we actually go into the classroom. And this is one of our most pivotal bits because this is where we can kind of talk to students about those social skills and problem solving skills for even the students that we might not see in an individual session or a group session. So that's where we can get to all the students. I also communicate with parents, and I have to communicate with agencies depending on whether I have some of the students that are in on an agent's caseload, maybe DCFS, Family Center, and we liaise on those students as well.
right. Speaking of a caseload, what is your caseload? How many sort of individual student clients do you have at any one time?
Currently, I have about 35, 36 students.
Okay.
However, I am at any moment there can be another student in Victor Scott or preschool that gets into my caseload, and because I am at a school where we have one and a half counselors, we have a counselor, Miss Janaea Painter, who also is between my school and Purvis. So I'm kind of looking over maybe 2/3 of the population of
Mm,
Victor Scott, which is we have 110 students. So at any moment, about 2/3 of those students can come to my office for individual counseling.
right. Now, what is Mrs. Keynes? What does a school counselor profession? Sorry, the population look like? Are they mainly women, men, older, younger? What's the demographic like?
You mean of our counselors? Well, we have a total of 39 of us within the school counseling program within Bermuda Public Schools. We have well, in terms of male and females, we have 5 males. And so that would be the remaining school counselors would be 34. We have 12 school counselors between Cedar Bridge and Barkley. And then we have 10 middle school and alternative school counselors. And then we
Mm.
have remaining 15 within our pre and primary schools here in Bermuda.
Okay, so how do you how does somebody get to actually be clients? How does a student get to be a counselor? get to be counseled? Sorry.
Okay. Well, a variety of ways. So a student can present themselves on their own. They can tell their teacher, in the primary school, can I, or middle or high school, they can, request to go and meet with their counselor. So it can be through student request, or we can have a teacher that may ask. For us to meet with the student. Also, we have our principals, we have the administrators, we have parents also making requests for us to meet with their children. So we have referrals, we have, requests from every angle, from every, every angle there, in terms of the school representatives, the teachers, and the staff there, as well as outside service, it's outside persons such as parents as well. And then, of
And
course, like I said, the students, they are the ones that will definitely come and request to see their counselor as well.
and typically, what sorts of things do they are they referred for?
They are referred for a variety of reasons. We have referrals that come in. They may want to see a counselor for a peer issue. They may be having a conflict with one of their friends. They may be having problems at home. They could be having a problem with their teacher. And I would say in the high school setting, we see some of that as well. I think we will see more of the teacher conflict within the high school setting. So variety of issues, sometimes they may be referred for um, in the high school setting, we are actually middle school setting as well. They may be referred because there's a suspicion of alcohol or drug abuse. There could be, sexual, physical abuse. I mean, so many different issues. We actually have about 147 different issues that students will present themselves or they will be referred to us for.
Right. What about in a lower school, Mrs. Aruda? What's
And I'd say if I could jump in, we have many of those issues, not so many of the drug related issues, I guess. They come more in later on. But one of the big ones that's happening recently are like grieving, lost
mm,
ones. We call them life events when there's a huge change in life. And depending on who the referral is coming from, usually if it's a parent, it's something that they've noticed at home. If it's a
oh,
teacher, usually it's something that they've noticed in school. Um, from my own observation, maybe I can see the affect of a student and see, maybe I should check up on that.
mm,
Um, but yeah, grief, uh, a, a relative moving away, separation in a family. These are like the main ones. Anxiety, test
right.
anxiety, anxiety with writing, depending on the year level. It's many different issues that students bring to kind of discuss with counselors in the lower school system.
Great. Has it sort of changed over the years, Mrs. Keynes? I mean, you've been in it for 22 decades now. Have you noticed a shift in the sort of things that you have to counsel children or students for?
Well, I would say that over the years it has been pretty consistent. However, I would say when I first started working at Cedar Bridge in the high school setting, we had more um, teen pregnancies that we were dealing with, and I found that we do not have many referrals coming in regarding that area. But grief and loss, that's something that's been pretty consistent.
Mm,
We also have suicidal ideation and thoughts of harming themselves. And I would like to share with you actually Mrs. Leanne Simmons, who was the
officer before.
the officer before me. She did a report last school year for the 2021-2022 school year. And what she found was, I can actually share with you based on the report,
Sure.
the number of referrals for, well, the highest number of referrals we received for a particular problem. And what she found was that the highest number of referrals came from drug and substance related areas. Now, I'd
Mm.
like to put into perspective that this was during COVID.
Oh, wow.
So 2021, 2022 school year, I believe that was a change that, that we had seen. It
Mm.
was different from previous years. So that was the highest level number of referrals that we made to different services, to counseling and life skills and other outside services for that particular issue. And then the next highest level of referrals that we made to outside services was harm to self. So suicidal ideation, suicidal, threats of harming themselves. That was the next
Is that also
level.
during COVID as well, during the
This
pandemic?
is all during COVID. And then the third level of referrals, the referrals that we made to outside services, the third highest level was inappropriate sexual behavior, and the fourth was physical abuse.
Mm.
So we did see some changes over, during the time, the period of COVID. So, we recognized that students were home most of the time, and they were in school remotely. But we noticed that there was a change in those areas.
Very interesting. Mr. Ruder, did you see some of those things at the pre and primary level?
Yes, definitely saw some of those things in the pre and primary level. I think I'm just looking at, because this is only my second year, but I'm thinking
Oh,
of
okay.
back to when I was a child. I don't think there was as many inappropriate touch and sexualization of the children, and that I've seen that a lot in
Right.
my 2 years here at Victor Scott, as a reason why a student has either referred themselves or is being referred to me.
But you're coming in during the pandemic, so your experience is the pandemic as a baseline. So
Right. I think maybe the first 2 months were
lockdown.
pandemic heavy. I think September, October. And then
Yeah.
from that point on, we started to loosen the restrictions, and
Okay.
but that is how it started for me. Yes.
And I would
Very
like to point out too that one of the other issues that we deal with a lot in high school are peer issues. So there may be some conflict with their peers or bullying behavior. We notice a lot of that as well. But during the period of COVID, of course, the students weren't in school, so there was hardly any interaction with their peers. It was more, you know, most times at home. So I
Did
do
you do any counseling during when they were home? How
We
did that?
did.
Mm.
Mhm. We did do counseling online, remotely. I know in the high school setting, we use mostly the Google platform, where we can actually chat with students
Yeah.
online without giving them our personal cell phone numbers. So we were able to chat with them and send emails. They emailed back and forth with us, and also we met with them through Google Meet. So we did have those sessions, and we did meet with our students during COVID.
Awesome.
Mhm.
And what did you find different about doing it in the online environments too? Was it somewhat easier? Were they more stressed about it, or as opposed to
I,
in person?
yeah, I found that the students, they didn't like being at home all day. They were home with their parents, and it was. I even know for myself, my girls had to come home from college, and so we were all in the house, and it was like, be quiet, I'm on the phone, and so.
Yeah.
But yeah, students, they didn't really. Most of them did not like um, online learning. However, in terms of counseling, I found that oftentimes students found that it was difficult to get privacy at home. I
Mm.
remember having a student, she said, Miss Keynes, I just can't talk to you. Like, it's hard. And I'm like, well, close the door. And she's like, well, they can still hear me. So I said, well, well, go outside. And do you think you can go outside and talk? And that was an issue in terms of privacy at home counseling, and especially with the parent being at home and with
Yeah.
the entire family being home.
It must have been challenging for both parties, the counselor and the clients as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So let me just say that we have a few people in the audience, I can tell, but nobody's asking any questions. So I want to urge anybody, if you have any questions, any thoughts, any ideas about counseling, things you always wanted to know but were afraid to ask, you can ask it now. Okay. While you're thinking about that, I want to ask Mr. Rudo about being one of a handful of male counselors. First of all, what do you think about the fact that guys are not going into this profession? Well, do you have any idea why?
I have a couple ideas why. I don't know if they are factual for everyone who is coming into their decisions of where they want to have their careers. But
Yeah.
I don't think that at least people my age were exposed to things outside of finance and hospitality. They really wanted to push us in those sectors. And
Mm.
I think it's difficult to get an experience of working in the social sciences, working with other people, if you aren't in this. Like, if I never was at the summer camp program, maybe I would have never gotten this connection with other people and found that I can help people through our conversations. I think it's just exposure and what previously was being pushed by the
Mm.
education system. We all need to go into finance and hospitality and tourism.
Yeah.
And I think now it's difficult because I do believe we need maybe more school counselors that are male, more teachers that are male, wherever we can have
Why?
positive role models that are
Okay.
males that our boys can look up to and talk to.
So I was going to ask you, why is that important? And you've already answered that question. You need positive male role models. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Um, and what are your, do you plan to be in this profession for the rest of your life, or what's the next step beyond being a school counselor?
I would say I'm extremely comfortable and I'm happy with where I am at Victor Scott. I would
Okay.
like for this to be a long term thing where I can finish my career at Victor Scott or finish my career in school counseling. The
Mm.
school has a rich history, and I think we're on the right track into changing some perceptions that have been made of the school in recent years, because it was a great school and it is a great school. So I'd like to be a part of that if possible. And I know there's a lot of change happening with
Yeah.
I can't remember what the transition, I can't remember what it's called, but the old learning
Education.
Yeah,
first.
yeah.
So we will see.
Transformation.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we will see what that looks like, and if people will be joining me, or if I will be moved, or. But I would love to finish my career as a school counselor, and it would be amazing if it could be at Victor Scott.
Wonderful. And you, Mrs. Keynes, you're moving up in the hierarchy. Do you do any counseling now, or you supervise everybody?
I right now I'm supervising everyone already. I do miss meeting with students and providing the counseling service to our students. I do miss it. And I'm going to see if there's some way, I don't know how I will have the time, but I would like to also try to connect with students even in this particular position. Um, but yes, I miss that already. I love being a counselor. Even though this, from time to time, there are difficult situations and cases that I have to deal with the students. I still love helping them and helping them to resolve their issues and helping them to cope with their particular issues that might arise.
Right. We have a comment here from Jamel Swan who says, "I really feel we need more male counselors because the boys really can relate to younger male counselors," which is exactly what you were saying, Mr. Rudo, correct?
Yeah.
So, what was my other question? Do we need more counselors altogether? Is a workload enough, or is it a heavy workload? Would you say at all levels?
Could I answer this one? I would love to.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think we do need more counselors. Hopefully, there's money that's put into that because I feel this way, and I'm sure Mrs. Keynes felt this way when she was working as a counselor. That there isn't enough time in the day, there aren't enough days in the week, and it's hard to see all the students we need to see um, as efficiently and as many times as would like to see them, especially
Hmm.
because we have so many other duties outside of individual counseling. So I do think it would be amazing if we could get more counselors that could work within the school system.
Okay. Would you agree with that, Mrs. Keynes?
Um, I do agree that there's a need. I do remember because it wasn't long ago being a school counselor, and it's just it's you're busy. You're always busy. There's no downtime, and
Mm.
you often spend time outside of the normal school day trying to do your paperwork and all of the other responsibilities that you have and
Yeah.
plan and things like that. And then, I definitely agree that it would be wonderful if more counselors were allocated to the program. I don't know if that's going to happen, but yes, I agree.
It's on your wish list.
Yes, definitely on my wish list, because the
Okay.
workload is very, very high. And when I was a school counselor just a few weeks ago, um, I was the S1 counselor and I had 170 students that I was responsible
Wow.
for. Um, and so it's like, how do you find the time to make sure that you reach every student
Yeah.
um, in one way or the other. So yeah, I definitely agree with Mr. Rudo.
So besides having those sort of was it soft skills, counseling skills, you also have to be pretty good at administration too to keep track of everybody. And but
Absolutely.
yeah,
And
what do you?
statistics, I know Mr. Rudo will smile at statistics. So yeah, we have to have the data there as well. So
Right. So,
at the end of each month, we want to know, what students have you seen? How many students have you seen? What have you seen them for? And
mm,
that's how Mrs. Simmons was able to gather the data that I gave you a few minutes ago is
yeah.
from the statistics. So that takes time all in itself. The paperwork it takes out a lot of time out of your day as well.
Yeah. What do you think people, we have about 3 more minutes, I think. We've been on talking for about almost half an hour. What do you think are the things that people ought to know about that they don't know? What are the things that sort of like, you know, people might be surprised to know about the counseling profession?
I would say that it's important for people to know that we as school counselors abide by a code of ethics and
Mm.
standards of practice that it guides how we deliver our services to our students. And these standards guide our behavior in terms of uh, leadership, advocacy for our students, and professionalism. But just know that we have a code of ethics as counselors that we abide by. Um, and they were developed by the American School Counseling Association as well as the American Counseling Association. So those are the bodies that
And this
develop these code of ethics for
that will
us.
include things like confidentiality and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But
Things like.
at what
Mhm.
point, at what point will you be required to break confidentiality?
So there are three reasons. So we do, when we meet with students on an individual basis and provide individual counseling, and we have a plan set up for them, a counseling intervention plan, we will make sure that we share with them the limits of confidentiality. And those reasons, the reasons why we might have to break it is if a student plans on if they plan on harming themselves, like if they have a plan on harming themselves, they're thinking about hurting
Right.
themselves, they're having suicidal ideation. If they plan on harming someone else,
Yeah.
then we would have to break confidentiality. And also, if someone is harming them. So
Right. And that,
all
what does that mean? You had to escalate it to,
we have to escalate it. Either, we will have to share it with their parent and make referrals to outside services. So if someone's planning on harming or has harmed that child in terms of abuse or neglect, then we would refer to child and family services.
hmm,
If the child is having suicidal ideation and they have a plan to harm themselves, our typical source that we'll use for referrals will be child and adolescent services.
right. Okay.
Uh-huh. And then, of course, if they plan on harming someone else, then we will notify that person, or that student, and maybe their guardian as well.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
And if I could jump in, I think the main thing there is that we want to keep them safe. So, especially with the suicidal ideations, parents are contacted as well because we need to make sure that they are in a safe space, that somebody is looking over them. And then CAS will be contacted to see if they can do an assessment to see what the child's needs are, and how we can assist further. But for all these things, we want to keep our children safe, um, and we want to make sure that they are given all the services and support that can help them through whatever the dilemma is, if it's being harmed or harming themselves or suicidal ideation.
Hmm. And how do you know when you're successful? For example, have you, Mrs. Keynes probably would, do you have a whole bunch of success stories when you can look back and say, that was one of my kids, I helped them, set them on the path to glory or something like that?
The
And you can
past
share
story.
this. Yes.
I do have my, certain students that I have really, I've seen them make changes and make improvements throughout the years while they were at Cedar Bridge Academy. But to be honest, uh, Mr. Johnson, I consider any student that actually graduates from our one of our schools. I consider those stories, all of them, success stories.
Okay.
So that's when
Because,
I know that there's been success. When you see them marching across that aisle, especially those ones that had a hard time and almost didn't make it through, or that they had trouble at home and there were, conflicts that they were dealing
mm,
with and had all of those issues, and they still survived, they made it through their educational journey successfully. That's when I'm such a proud school counselor at that point. Yeah.
awesome. Now, Mr. Ruder, you too early in your career to say, or can you say you've had major success stories? Sorry, I shouldn't make an assumption.
So I would say it's two ways that I can kind of gauge whether or not a student has been successful. Mrs. Keynes talked about the counseling intervention plans. So
Mm.
depending on the issue, we can set up a plan. And once I know that that student has met all their goals, I say, okay, wow, this student
Oh,
is
I see.
has found success in exactly what we were looking for. Also, that's something more concrete. Not every student will be on a counseling intervention plan. sometimes it's if like let's say it's a coping strategy that a student was looking for, and they just met me 2 or 3 times. And the student, I can give one example of last year. A student ran right to me and said, "Mr. Rudo, somebody took my juice box and I just came straight to you because I didn't want to hit him." And I was like, wow, well done. They're learning. They knew to separate themselves. They took their deep breaths. Those things that when they get in those tough situations, the situations that have led them to be referred to me or for them to come to me, they've
Okay.
worked it out. Because the main thing is we want to take what the learning that we do in the session now in the office and transfer it into the real world, transfer it into the school.
So is that what you sort of, some of the things you teach them, you give them skills to resolve conflicts, them to step back, take a breath, and is that the sort of thing you would do for that situation?
Now we do that in guidance, and depend on the student, we may come to some coping strategies. And sorry, not depend on the student, depend on the situation, we can come to some coping strategies. Just depends on what the student is actually in for. But that is one bit that may come about in a counseling session.
Great. So is there anything else we haven't talked about that needs to be spoken about? No? I think we covered a pretty broad spectrum of things about counseling. So I'm just going to thank our audience. We have about 15 people out there watching, and special thank you for Jamel Swan and Sasha Andrews, who had some comments about the male counselor topic. And also, if anybody has any more questions, or if you have any ideas about what we should be covering in future episodes, please let us know. Thank you so much, Mrs. Queens and Mr. Rudo. And I think I will be signing off now. I'm sort of watching to see if anybody has any other questions. But thanks a lot, and have a good night.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for having us. Bye-bye.
Oh, look, comments. I'm going to put this comments up. Wait. Ah, what a wonderful example Mr. Rudo is setting. Is that a friend of yours?
That's my nana.
Why, thank you, Miss Audrey
He is.
Hollis.
Thank you, nana.
Awesome. All right. Good night, everybody. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
That's a nice positive ending there.
Yes.
Good night.
Good night.